Welcome to WWII Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. The year is 1942. The heart of Europe is shackled by the iron fist of the Third Reich. Across Germany, a pervasive atmosphere of dread hangs in the air, a chilling silence enforced by the ever-present threat of the Gestapo. This is a nation where dissent is a death sentence, where a whispered word against the regime can lead to a pre-dawn knock on the door and a one-way trip to a place without a name. The machinery of oppression is brutally efficient. Political prisons and concentration camps have metastasized across the landscape, monuments of concrete and barbed wire designed to break the human spirit. Places like Auschwitz and Ravensbrück are not just prisons. They are factories of despair, implementing a state-sanctioned policy of dehumanization. A core tenet of this policy is systematic starvation, a concept historians refer to as Hitler's hunger plan. Food is not just sustenance. It is a tool of control, a weapon wielded with chilling precision. Prisoners are reduced to skeletal figures, their daily existence a gnawing battle against an abyss of hunger. Rations are scientifically calculated to be just below the threshold of survival, ensuring a slow, agonizing demise. This deliberate deprivation is designed to extinguish the last embers of resistance, to make the prisoner's world shrink to the size of a single, desperate craving for a crust of bread. It is in this landscape of absolute control and calculated cruelty that our story begins. In a world where most citizens are paralyzed by fear or swept up in nationalist fervor, a few rare individuals choose a different path. They are the quiet dissenters, the invisible rebels who refuse to surrender their conscience. Their resistance is not fought with guns and bombs, but with quiet acts of defiance that carry an equal risk of death. They operate in the shadows, their courage a flickering candle against a hurricane of hate. To be caught is to face certain torture and execution, to disappear into the very system they fight against. This is the world that Margret Zassenhaus must navigate, a world where a simple act of kindness is a revolutionary act. In Hamburg, amidst the rising tide of Nazism, lived a young woman named Hildegard Margret Zassenhaus. Born into a family of academics who valued intellectual freedom and human dignity above all else, she was an anomaly in her generation. Her father, a historian and school principal, was dismissed from his post in 1933 for refusing to join the Nazi Party. This early, personal encounter with the regime's intolerance instilled in Margret a profound and unwavering opposition to its ideology. She was not a soldier or a politician. She was a scholar, a gifted linguist with a passion for Scandinavian languages and literature. While her peers were joining the League of German Girls, Zassenhaus was immersing herself in the works of foreign authors, her mind building bridges to worlds beyond the Reich's suffocating intellectual borders. Her path of resistance began subtly, long before she ever set foot in a prison. In the late 1930s, as the persecution of Jews intensified, she refused to stand by. Using her linguistic skills and a network of contacts, she began helping Jewish families navigate the labyrinthine bureaucracy of immigration, translating documents and providing counsel to help them escape Germany before the borders slammed shut for good. Each family she helped was a small victory against the tide of hate, a quiet assertion of her own moral code. But as war erupted and the Reich's grip tightened, this avenue of resistance closed. The very people she sought to help were now trapped. It was a moment of crisis, a point where many would have retreated into the safety of silent complicity. For Zassenhaus, however, it was a call to adapt. Her focus shifted from those trying to escape the country to those imprisoned within it. The political dissidents, the pastors, the intellectuals, the artists, anyone who dared to oppose the Nazi regime. These were the forgotten prisoners, men and women of conscience who were being systematically erased from society. Margret Zassenhaus, armed with nothing more than her intellect, her linguistic abilities, and an unshakable belief in right and wrong, was about to step into the heart of the Nazi prison system. She was driven by a simple, powerful conviction that no wall, whether made of stone or ideology, could extinguish the fundamental right to human dignity. The key that would unlock the gates of the Reich's most formidable prisons was, ironically, provided by the regime itself. In 1940, Zassenhaus was a student of philology at the University of Hamburg. Her fluency in Scandinavian languages made her a valuable asset, and she was assigned to a seemingly innocuous role, censoring the mail of Scandinavian political prisoners held in German jails. This was her first glimpse into the abyss. Reading the desperate, heavily redacted letters, she saw not just words, but the faint pulse of humanity struggling to survive. This role soon expanded. In 1943, her skills caught the attention of the German Justice Department, which desperately needed interpreters to facilitate visits between Scandinavian prisoners and chaplains sent by relief organizations like the Red Cross. Zassenhaus, with her impeccable linguistic credentials and unassuming academic demeanor, was the perfect candidate. She was granted official papers, an Ausweis that gave her legitimate access to the dark heart of the system. This was her disguise. To the stoic prison wardens and suspicious Gestapo agents, she was just a translator, a bureaucratic cog in their vast machine of incarceration. They saw a quiet, scholarly woman dutifully performing her state-sanctioned task. They could not see the fierce resolve burning behind her calm eyes. On her first official visit, the reality of the situation struck her with the force of a physical blow. The echoing clang of steel doors, the grim faces of the guards, and the sight of the prisoners, gaunt, pale figures with eyes hollowed out by hunger and despair, solidified her purpose. She was there to translate words of spiritual comfort, but she knew instantly that it was not enough. Words could not fill an empty stomach. Words could not mend a body racked by disease and malnutrition. Standing in a cold, sterile visitation room, separated from a Norwegian prisoner by a thick wire mesh, she made a silent vow. She would do more. She would become more than an interpreter of words. She would become a courier of hope. The decision was made in a heartbeat, but it was a decision that would redefine her life and place it in constant peril. Every prison she entered from that day forward would be a battlefield, and her weapons would be hidden in plain sight. Zassenhaus's operation began with small, calculated risks. A loaf of dark bread slipped from her bag into the hands of a prisoner during a moment of feigned distraction. A precious vitamin tablet concealed in the spine of a Bible. A whispered message of encouragement passed along with a translated letter. Each successful act emboldened her, and she began to build a sophisticated system, a logistical network of hope operating under the very noses of her enemies. The greatest challenge was the Nazi practice of Nacht und Nebel, or night and fog. Political prisoners were deliberately and constantly transferred between prisons without notice. This was a cruel tactic designed to sever their ties to the outside world, to make them disappear, to break their spirits by erasing any hope of contact with loved ones. For Zassenhaus, this meant her work was a relentless intelligence-gathering mission. She became a human database. During her visits, she would memorize names, prison numbers, and scraps of information about impending transfers. Back in her small apartment, she maintained meticulous, coded records on thousands of index cards. These were not just names on a list. They were lifelines. Her records tracked the movements of over 1,000 Scandinavian prisoners across a sprawling network of more than 50 different prisons, sub-camps, and Gestapo holding cells throughout Germany. Her apartment became the secret hub of a vast smuggling enterprise. It was a clearinghouse for parcels from families in Scandinavia, filled with food, warm clothing, and medicine. She would receive these packages, carefully unwrap them, and then repackage the contents into smaller, concealable bundles. She developed an instinct for what would pass inspection. A block of cheese might be too obvious, but thin slices interleaved within the pages of a book might not be. She coordinated with a network of resistance contacts and sympathetic church officials who helped her procure additional supplies and information. The risks were immense. Her briefcase, seemingly filled with official documents and dictionaries, was often laden with contraband. Every train journey was fraught with tension, every checkpoint a potential disaster. A random search by a suspicious official would have been a death sentence. The strain was immense, a constant, grinding pressure that required nerves of steel and an extraordinary capacity for compartmentalization. To the outside world, she was a diligent student and interpreter. In secret, she was the architect of a complex, life-saving conspiracy. As her network expanded, so did the danger. Margret Zassenhaus was no longer just a compassionate individual. She was a critical node in an international resistance effort. The sheer scale of her operation, covering dozens of facilities from Hamburg in the north to the grim camps in the south, multiplied her exposure and the chances of a fatal mistake. She lived a double life, a tightrope walk over a chasm of discovery. In her official capacity, she was polite, efficient, and unremarkable, careful never to draw attention to herself. She learned the rhythms of the bureaucracy, the vanities of the commandants, and the tells of the guards. She understood that her greatest protection was to appear harmless. But beneath this placid exterior was a mind constantly calculating, observing, and planning. There were countless close calls. On one occasion, a notoriously cruel prison guard, known for his sadistic searches, began to inspect her briefcase with unusual thoroughness. He ran his hands along the lining, his fingers just millimeters from a hidden cache of medical supplies. Zassenhaus held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She engaged him in a dull, academic conversation about a point of Scandinavian grammar, distracting him just long enough for his attention to wander. He slammed the briefcase shut and waved her through, annoyed but unsuspecting. That moment, lasting perhaps 30 seconds, felt like an eternity. It was a stark reminder of how thin the veil of her deception was. The psychological toll was immense. She lived with the constant fear of the late-night knock, the screech of tires outside her window. The faces of the starving prisoners haunted her sleep. She carried the weight of their lives in her hands, and the knowledge that a single slip-up would not only doom her, but also extinguish the flicker of hope for hundreds of men and women. This was a turning point, not marked by a single event, but by the gradual realization that her path was irreversible. She had seen too much, knew too much, and cared too much to stop. The initial impulse of compassion had evolved into a steely, all-consuming mission. She was caught in a web of her own making, a web of deception that, while dangerous, was saving lives. She accepted the risk, embracing the reality that her own survival was now secondary to the survival of those who depended on her. In the brutal calculus of the Nazi prison system, food was power. The regime wielded starvation as a deliberate instrument of policy, a slow-motion execution designed to crush both body and soul. For the prisoners Margret Zassenhaus visited, a single extra piece of bread was not merely sustenance. It was an act of rebellion. It was a declaration that they were still human, that someone in the outside world remembered them, and that the Reich had not yet won. Zassenhaus understood this profoundly. Her smuggling operation was a direct counteroffensive against Hitler's hunger plan. She became a master of concealment. Food had to be dense in calories, non-perishable, and most importantly, invisible. She smuggled concentrated Swedish bread, hard cheese, and dried sausage, items that could provide vital protein and fat. These were luxuries beyond imagination for men subsisting on watery soup and sawdust-filled bread. She would hollow out books, creating secret compartments for food parcels. She sewed hidden pockets into the lining of her coat. She used every ounce of her ingenuity to transform ordinary objects into vessels of life. The moment of transfer was the most perilous part of her mission. Inside the cold visitation rooms, under the bored yet watchful eyes of the guards, she had to make the exchange. Sometimes it was a quick handoff, a parcel passed under the table as she pointed to a passage in a book. Other times it was left in a prearranged spot, a package tucked behind a loose brick or inside a designated Bible. Each delivery was a small miracle of logistics and nerve, but the impact was monumental. For a prisoner on the brink of starvation, a few hundred extra calories a day could be the difference between life and death. It could provide the strength to fight off diseases like typhus and tuberculosis that ran rampant in the overcrowded, unsanitary barracks. Beyond the physical, The psychological impact was immeasurable. The arrival of a food parcel was a tangible link to the outside world, a message that they were not forgotten. It was proof that the Reich's walls were not impenetrable. This food, smuggled at unimaginable risk, was a weapon against despair. It rebuilt not just the body, but the will to live, fueling the internal resistance that was the last line of defense for these captive souls. Every slice of cheese, every piece of bread delivered by Zassenhaus was a direct blow against the inhumanity of the Nazi regime. While food kept the body alive, information sustained the spirit of resistance. Margret Zassenhaus quickly realized that her unique access made her more than a smuggler of calories. She was a vital communications link. She became a keeper of secrets, a living conduit for the hopes, fears, and strategic messages of the imprisoned opposition. The risk of carrying information was arguably even greater than that of carrying food. A block of cheese could be explained away as a personal lunch. A coded message detailing resistance activities or listing the names of Gestapo informants was an undeniable death sentence. Zassenhaus memorized countless messages, her mind a vault of sensitive intelligence. When a message was too complex to memorize, it had to be written on the smallest scrap of paper, often in a simple code, and concealed in the most ingenious ways, rolled tightly inside a pen cap, tucked beneath a postage stamp on a letter, or written in invisible ink between the lines of an approved text. She connected disparate groups of prisoners, allowing them to share information and maintain morale. She carried news from the outside world, snippets from Allied radio broadcasts that gave the lie to Nazi propaganda, and offered a glimmer of hope that the war might one day end. Crucially, she carried messages out, delivering them to resistance cells, foreign legations, and the families of the prisoners. This two-way flow of information was critical. It allowed the resistance to know who was still alive, who had been transferred, and what information the Gestapo might have extracted through torture. For the families, her messages were a precious confirmation that their loved ones had not yet vanished into the night and fog. Her meticulous index cards were more than just a logistical tool. They were an act of historical preservation. In a system designed to erase individuals, to turn them into nameless numbers, her records insisted on their identity. She was creating an archive of the persecuted, ensuring that if the worst happened, there would be a record. She was a witness, bearing the responsibility of memory for those the regime sought to obliterate. Margret Zassenhaus, the quiet linguist, had become the central switchboard for a network of defiance. Her every visit a delicate dance of espionage, where a single misstep could bring the entire system crashing down. By late 1944 and early 1945, the Third Reich was in its death throes. Allied bombers hammered German cities, turning them into apocalyptic landscapes of fire and rubble. The infrastructure of the nation was collapsing, and with it, the rigid order of the prison system descended into chaos. For Margret Zassenhaus, this new reality brought different, more acute dangers. Train travel became a life-threatening gamble, with routes constantly being bombed and strafed by Allied fighters. Journeys that once took hours now took days, forcing her to navigate a landscape of destruction and desperation. Yet she persisted. The final months of the war were a frantic race against time. As the Nazi regime crumbled, the commandants of the prisons and camps became more erratic and brutal. There were fears of last-minute mass executions, of prisoners being murdered to eliminate witnesses to the Reich's crimes. Zassenhaus's work became more urgent than ever. She redoubled her efforts, using her contacts to try and ensure the prisoners in her care would not be killed in the final, spasmodic violence of the collapsing regime. It was during this period that her work intersected with one of the great rescue operations of the war, the White Buses. This was an initiative led by the Swedish Red Cross to negotiate the release of Scandinavian prisoners from German concentration camps and transport them to safety in Sweden. Zassenhaus's meticulously kept records were invaluable. She knew who the prisoners were and, crucially, where they were located within the chaotic German prison system. She was able to provide lists of names and locations to the rescue organizers, helping to guide the white buses to the correct facilities. She was on the ground, a vital link in the chain of liberation, helping to coordinate the release of the very men and women she had risked her life to keep alive for years. As the first Allied tanks rolled into Germany, Zassenhaus witnessed the liberation of the camps. It was a moment of profound, sorrowful triumph. Seeing the skeletal survivors emerge into the light was a validation of her sacrifice, but also a horrifying testament to the depths of the regime's depravity. Her secret war was over, but the memories of the walls, both real and metaphorical, would remain with her forever. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, a different kind of battle began for Margret Zassenhaus, the struggle to process the trauma she had endured and witnessed. The end of the war did not bring immediate peace to her mind. The constant adrenaline, the hypervigilance, the gnawing fear that had been her companions for years did not simply vanish. She carried the faces of the prisoners with her, the weight of the secrets she had kept, and the ghosts of those who did not survive. The human cost of her resistance was immense. While she had saved hundreds of lives, the work had taken a profound psychological toll. She had lived a solitary existence, isolated by the secrecy of her mission, unable to confide in almost anyone for fear of betrayal. This internal isolation, this building of walls around her own heart to protect her mission, was one of the deepest scars. In the years following the war, she would document her experiences in her powerful memoir, Walls. The title was deeply symbolic. It referred not only to the physical prison walls she breached, but also to the walls of fear, indifference, and hatred erected by the Nazi regime. Her book was a testament to the idea that these ideological walls could be overcome by individual acts of courage and conscience. It was an exploration of the human cost of living under tyranny, not just for the victims, but for the resistors as well. She wrote about the heavy burden of her double life, the moral compromises sometimes necessary to achieve a greater good, and the enduring power of hope in the darkest of times. The prisoners she had helped, now free, never forgot her. Many would later write that they owed their lives to the quiet, determined German woman who brought them bread and messages. They spoke of how her visits were a light in the darkness, a reminder that not all Germans were complicit, and that humanity could be found in the most unlikely of places. Her story is a poignant reminder that the casualties of war are not only counted on the battlefield. The moral and psychological injuries inflicted by such a conflict are deep and lasting. Margret Zassenhaus survived the war, but she was forever changed by her journey through the heart of its darkness. After the war, Margret Zassenhaus emigrated to the United States, where she became a respected physician in Baltimore, continuing her life's work of caring for others. For many years, the full extent of her wartime heroism remained largely unknown, but the survivors did not forget. Slowly, her story came to light piece by piece, as the men she helped save shared their testimonies. Recognition followed. The governments of Norway and Denmark bestowed upon her their highest civilian honors. She was decorated by Germany and awarded the Red Cross Medal. She was even nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. These accolades honored a legacy of profound importance. Zassenhaus's story stands as a powerful and rare example of resistance from within the ethnic German population. In a nation where conformity was enforced through terror, her actions demolish the myth of collective guilt and prove that individual moral choice was still possible. She provides a human face to the concept of civil courage, demonstrating that one does not need to be a soldier to be a warrior. Her battlefield was the human heart, and her victories were measured in lives saved and spirits unbroken. She is credited with directly saving the lives of at least 1,200 political prisoners. Her meticulous records, her smuggled food, and her vital messages were the margin between survival and death for hundreds who would have otherwise vanished into the Nazi machine. Her legacy is not one of grand military strategy or technological innovation, but of something more fundamental: the unwavering power of a single person's conscience. She proved that even in the face of a totalitarian monster, one individual, armed with courage and compassion, could make a profound difference. She is remembered as the Angel of the Prisons, a title bestowed upon her by the men she saved. Her life is a timeless lesson that the most formidable walls are not made of brick and mortar, but of fear, and that the courage to defy that fear is the most powerful weapon of all. Her story is a vital chapter in the history of World War II, reminding us that heroism can be found in the quietest acts of defiance, and that the fight for humanity is one small, courageous choice at a time. Thank you for joining WWII Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.